Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We are now having this big event, the webinar, COVID-19 Leap Forward. I want to thank the presenters. I want to thank Ninan from New York. I want to thank Chad and Alexandra from TripAdvisor. Yeah. I want to thank Karim from Elewana, a Kenyan investor here. Unfortunately, Joanne, who is our moderator, could not because of, again, internet problems. Maggie, who is our researcher, you know her very well known here. Maggie, thank you very much. And then we have Damian from Watamu. And then we have Hugo from Portugal. Those are the panelists that we have. I see Hugo connecting. But I think we should proceed. Hugo, you're there? Hugo is from McKinsey. He's coming in and out, but we proceed. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Today is very important because we are doing this for the first time between government and private sector. And I don't want to be the most dominant person on this event. I just want to appreciate we are now under unprecedented times because of this crisis. And this crisis we never expected before. It has been so serious that it had to shut down the entire world. Every country in one way or another, they are under lockdown, they are under curfews, they are under restrictions. So we are not different as Kenya. But here today, we brought different diverse panelists to appreciate what can we do as a country, what can we do as an industry, and move forward. And when we move forward, we just don't want to repeat probably the mistakes what we did before. What we need to do is that how do we do better when the world opens up? Definitely, when this crisis happened, you have seen His Excellency the President has extended another 21 days for curfew and lockdown in some counties. So this will be the norm for another 21 days and maybe gradually open up the country as well. But yes, the government immediately came in with some measures, and those are medical measures. How do you do social distances? How do you wear a mask? How do you make sure that when you report to the medical facilities, you get attended to? And so far, touch wood, the figures in Kenya are not that high, but we have to be strict to make sure we control these figures. 14 deaths, 100 plus recovered, and 350 plus which have been reported cases. We are not as bad, but we don't want to reach to those bad situations. And then after that, President also pronounced some stimulus packages, not for tourism per se, but across the board. And these packages have been very positive, and especially for the month of April, because people saved some little money in the reduction of their pay-as-you-earn, corporate taxes, VAT. So those were key stimulus projects. Although I'm still lobbying very hard on your behalf, I have also seen many questions on what stimulus packages for the industry. We are still negotiating with National Treasury and making them understand how important this industry is. This industry employs over 1.6 million people in Kenya. And we need to make sure that those 1.6 million people go back to their place of employment. Otherwise, we will lose not only jobs, but we will lose businesses. And this is crucial. I think the message has already been delivered to Treasury. I've worked with the Kenya Tourism Federation and the associations. We have presented almost 15 items on behalf of the sector. I think the tourism sector was more proactive because we were the first people to meet the industry, asking them what they need and what do they expect government to do. And some of the actions have been taken, but some of the actions are yet to be taken. So today is actually, we want to say, what do we do together? This is not about government. This is not about private sector. This is about together as a people, together as an industry. How do we move forward, and not only move forward, but leap forward? That's why we have put this current situation. The reality check is that there'll be a new world order. The reality check, there'll be a worry of travel, international travel, until a vaccine is discovered. The reality check, when you travel, you will need to have a certificate that proven that you have been checked with negative coronavirus. That's the reality check. As well as reality check any destination that takes control of hygiene measures. That is a destination people will go. But also, which are the industries going to be supported or to be more active? The industry that is going to be very active is going to be, again, the IT industry. E-commerce will be crucial. So we need to be digital, all of us. As you see today, we are digital. But again, we are on and off. Do we have enough bandwidth? Do we have enough internet? Do we have enough configuration from an office to a home, to a house? I had to configure my house myself to an office and bringing the Kenyan flags behind me to prove authority as well. But we need to configure offices to be conducive for working, because this will be a long-term action. Yes, we need to appreciate that what will be next. If we are working on our traditional markets, those traditional markets might not open immediately. Those traditional markets might take some time. What are the new markets we can be able to approach? Probably the immediate market that is going to open sooner than later is the domestic market. We need to make sure that we have the right taste for the domestic market product, for the right taste, as well the right price, because pricing will be sensitive to the domestic market. And remember, when people open up, when this thing is over, they'll be exhausted, they need a break, but they will be broke at the same time. So they will need to be sensitive on how much they are paying for their holidays. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to dominate today's discussion. Today's discussion was supposed to be moderated by Joanna Mwangi. Unfortunately, internet is weak. I thought we in Mombasa here on Bipingo, we have low bandwidth, but Nairobi also has a problem. But I can tell you in the next 2 months, through the partnership of Google Loon and the government, we will have the entire country covered by balloons above the flight path or the flight zone with 4G bandwidth. So that will resolve most of our problems in terms of internet. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce our first speaker, Hugo. Are you here, Hugo? It seems Hugo is not here, but definitely we will need Hugo to present to us later. Hugo works for McKinsey, and you have seen his profile over there. Yeah, he wants to upload his slides. We'll make him upload his slides at the right time. But probably here we can invite Alexandra yourselves in terms of data, and then she'll be supported by Chad as well of what is going on in the travel sector. Probably Alexandra, welcome. Unmute, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Good afternoon, guys. I'm trying to launch the slides at the moment, but I can't see them anymore. Chad, can you launch them? Do you have access to them?
No, I only have access to mine. Harry, can you get Alexandra's slides launched, please? While we work on that, just a quick introduction to myself and Alex. We work on the destination marketing team at TripAdvisor EMEA. I look after all of Sub-Saharan Africa, several other regions, whereas Alex looks after France and much of continental Europe. What we're going to be speaking about is, it's in two parts. So Alex is going to tell us about the first party data that we're seeing on TripAdvisor since the outbreak of COVID-19, what that has done to our users researching and booking travel. So she's going to bring you up to date to where we are today. And then I'm going to be speaking about a user survey that we ran with travelers around the world as to their perception of travel over the next 12 months, how they foresee an impact on their own travel patterns and spend, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. Harry, do you have access to her slides?
I will upload them again. Just seeing if it's.
Probably if the slides are not working, can we proceed with the narrative?
Sure, no problem. It's going to be a bit complicated to follow, but I will try to be as clear as I can. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. As chat say, I'm working for TripAdvisor and I'm based in France, in Paris. Today, I would like to go through a little bit about our internal data. I'm pretty sure you all know that TripAdvisor is the biggest travel website in the world. We are having a lot of browsing and it's giving us access to tremendous amount of data. So what we do actually is we wanted to see what was the impact about COVID on the travel planning. And that's what we are going to present today. So the first impact we have seen is the shift to domestic travel. That's going to be the first one. So basically, if we look at our booking trends for domestic travel, we can see that depending on the region of the world, the booking window is more or less long. The shortest will be for Middle East, with only an 11 days for domestic booking window. And then South America and APAC are both having more 24 days booking window, followed by the North America, who has 39 days, which means basically domestic booking starting to show in end of May. And then followed by your region, Africa. Africa for domestic booking at the moment, we see a 46 days booking window, which lead those booking probably for early June. And then the last region of the world at the moment is Europe with 84 days booking window. So what does it mean basically compared to last year? For regions such as South America, Middle East and APAC, doesn't change much. It's 1 or 2 days longer than normally. For your region, Africa, domestic booking are actually 27 days longer than what we were seeing last year. So basically it was 19 days last year and it's now 46, as I was saying. So that's for the domestic booking window. But if we look at the international booking window, that's a bit different. Internationally, the region with the shortest international booking window is actually Africa. 64 days booking window for international booking, which leads to more or less mid-June, which means only 2 weeks more than the domestic booking window we can see. So the shortest one is your region, Africa, followed by the Middle East, 73 days, followed then by APAC and South America, 125 days. North America, 132 days, so it's late August. And then followed by Europe, which is mid-September. What does it mean compared to last year again? Basically, Africa has 17 days longer booking window for international booking, but it's the shortest because it goes up to 91 days longer for Europe. Just to let you know, so you can't see you can't see the slide, but basically we all know that at the moment the regional change and the booking are down compared to last year. But we still see some light out of the tunnel because we are looking at TripAdvisor on week-over-week increase. And for the first time last week, we see a very nice increase in America, Europe, Middle East, and Africa for all the different regional change, domestic, intra-region, and outside region. For example, for Americas, looking outside region, so for Europe, Middle East, Africa, we can see an increase of 3%. It's the second week with this increase. And for Europe, Middle East, Africa, looking outside their region, we can see an increase of 6.4%. So that's already some light out of the tunnel. Over to you, Chad.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think what's really interesting about those statistics is that we're seeing across all regions in the world an increase in confidence that travel is going to be coming back. We've seen week-on-week increases, both for domestic and international travel for at least 2 weeks now, which I think is a strong signal that while people aren't able to travel yet, there is confidence that they will be out traveling soon and they're planning. So let me just bring up my slides here. Right. Hopefully everyone can see this. So what I'm going to be talking about is a survey that we at TripAdvisor partnered with Qualtrics to survey travelers around the world in 5 key markets, in the US, Japan, Australia, Italy, and the UK. We've been questioning these customers for about a month, just over a month now, about how COVID-19 has affected their travel plans and how they foresee their travel plans for the next year or so. So the first thing we wanted to find out is how COVID-19 affected their concrete travel plans that were already in existence. What we found was relatively positive. We found that 34% of people were planning to reschedule their travel plans. 27% are planning to reschedule a trip. Only 17% of respondents said that they were planning on canceling and not rescheduling their travel, which I think is strong. There's a lot of confidence within travelers that the industry is going to come back and they're going to be wanting to take that trip that they planned. We asked them why they were canceling their trips or changing their plans. And overwhelmingly, the reason that people were changing their plans was that they weren't able to travel. The planes weren't flying, the hotels weren't open, the destinations had restrictions on their immigration. So once all of these factors are negated, the planes start going again, etc., these travelers are confident they're going to be coming back. So a bit more about their mindset as travelers now. We asked them, we know that domestic travel is going to be the first part of the industry that's going to pick up. People are going to feel more confident traveling close to home. And we wanted to know how quickly they expected that to resume once they were able to get out of their houses and travel. What we found is 97% of respondents said that they would feel comfortable traveling domestically within 6 months of COVID-19 becoming managed, which is fantastic. That's showing your domestic industry rebounding almost a full capacity if able within 6 months. Interestingly, the confidence was also there for international travelers. 89% of people said that they would feel comfortable traveling within 6 months of COVID-19 becoming under control internationally. Really strongly, between 1 and 6 months was well over 65% of travelers. So again, once the airline capacity gets up to speed, once the hotels open, once immigration restrictions are lifted, consumers are happy to begin traveling internationally again. We also found that travelers are excited about their future trips. They can't wait to travel again. 82% of the respondents to the survey said they're excited to plan their next trip post-COVID-19. 63% actually spent time over the last week researching potential future trips. And 50% of our users spent up to 5 hours in the last week planning their next trip. So they're using this downtime while they're not traveling to dream about traveling. And this is where the smart destinations are getting involved in their marketing. They're reinforcing their brand image while people are stuck inside. They're giving them inspirational content to interact with, and getting that brand association with that once in a lifetime, post-COVID-19 destination for travelers. We broke that down by market. And we asked them, are you excited about planning your next trip? And overwhelmingly, across all of the markets surveyed, people said yes. The Japanese people are apparently dying to get out of their houses and see things, but we're seeing that level of excitement across all of these places. But the British, maybe unsurprisingly, not as excited as the rest, but that's us here. And we asked them, are you actively planning your next trip? Again, over 50% in all of these markets. They don't know when they're going to be traveling, but they know they are going to be traveling. And we're getting involved in this inspiration level stuff as well. So yesterday, we actually sent an email to all of our registered TripAdvisor users promoting a photographer who's promoting tourism in Masai Mara. So we uploaded this. It goes along with our new brand identity of there's good out there, trying to highlight people doing good things for the travel industry, even while travel isn't happening. And that link to a blog post about this photographer and her work promoting the Masai Mara on the TripAdvisor blog. So changes to future travel. We've asked people how their current plans have been affected, but we want to know about forward plans for the next year. 53% of the people who were surveyed said that they are doing more research for planning their next trip. They have the time now. They aren't going anywhere. They're not going to the office. So they're dreaming of getting out of the house. We asked them what kind of trip are they most likely to be taking once they're out. And we've seen some big shifts in the type of product that people want once the lands. Perhaps unsurprisingly, with the swing towards domestic travel, road trips are becoming more attractive to travelers. What's also very interesting, though, and great for Kenya as a product, is that 40% say they're more likely to take a beach vacation. These guys really want to switch off after all the stress of everything being associated with COVID-19, the economic uncertainty, the health worries, etc. These guys want to hit the sand, get a sunburn, and really switch off. Travel, still top of mind for people today. 77% of the respondents said that travel is important to them, even when they can't do it. So the planning process is part of the appeal for them. 68% say that during this time, they're still thinking about travel and where they want to go next. So that all important first trip post-COVID-19. 60% of the respondents said in the next 12 months, they think that they will be about as well off or better than they were before COVID-19, which bodes well for travel as a kind of a non-essential spend. 41% said that they are going to take the same amount of trips or more in the 12 months after COVID-19, which again is really strong in terms of consumer confidence. And what do they want? 66% said that they want to go somewhere new. For non-African market consumers, that's great for Kenya. You've always been considered a once-in-a-lifetime destination, and this is the time to capitalize on that. And 59% said they want to go somewhere off the beaten path. Again, Kenya can really play into this really strongly with fantastic wildlife products that most travelers have never seen, etc. 76% said that what's really important to them when booking their first trip post-COVID-19 is flexible cancellation policies. So the industry in Kenya really needs to focus on offering flexibility to travelers to convince them to come back and come back quickly. And 53%, we touched on this earlier, 53% said that they're going to be seeking value in their first trip. That's not necessarily that they're going to be looking for the cheapest holiday, but they're going to be after something that offers perceived value for money. And again, I think that's where Kenya can really play to its strengths. There's so many products that are only available in Kenya. And if you showcase that there is quality for money and the travelers are receiving value for their spend, you're going to be seeing them coming back to Kenya much faster than some other destinations. So I hope I went through that quickly enough. I know we're running a bit behind schedule, but I think now we're going to open it up for Q&A. Is that right?
Thank you very much, Chad, and thank you. It's great to join you guys. I'm so sorry I struggled with my internet, and I'm very glad to join you. Thank you, Chad. Thanks, Alexandra. That was really, really interesting. I could hear you in as much as I couldn't participate. And thank you, Bwana CS, for taking over and running it very smoothly. I welcome the audience, and I want to say that the questions that I'd like us to tackle at this point for Chad and Alexandra is really on consumer insights. And the first question is, when you say that people are looking for new destination off the beaten path, does that include the type of, did they say the kind of travel they are thinking of? What is off the beaten path for them? Chad.
So that's up to the individual respondent. So we gave them several types of travel. We didn't dig down deeper into that. I think, that's something that we can happily look into in future surveys. So happy to suggest that to our research team and see what we can find out there in terms of deeper insights.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I also want to say that from
probably
the audience,
can ask you, Andrea.
Go ahead, Waziri.
Probably I can ask Chad and Alexandra to say that. So road trips will be much more than air trips, and for any reasons or because of the health issues, are they the main reasons people are not going to take their flights? And also the period when they are going to fly in six months' time. Are they evaluating the current situation, or they made a decision that in 6 months' time they'll travel? Thank you.
So I think that we're seeing road trips as one of the biggest growth areas in terms of travel type. There's a couple of reasons behind that. I think there is the perceived health implication of boarding a flight in a post-COVID-19 world. But I think there's also some other logistical issues as well. People have uncertainty about whether or not they book a flight, if it's actually going to happen. With all of these flight cancellations, they feel more confident that they can stick to their plans if they're driving. There's also issues with health coverage, for example. People, if they stay domestically on a road trip, they don't have to deal with potentially going to a health system where if they go to the hospital, they don't speak the language or they have to worry about insurance issues. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into the concern about air travel and long-haul travel in general. When it comes to when international flights are going to pick up in terms of user confidence, I think based on the research that we've seen on site, there's significant increases in interest from about Q3. We're seeing increases in long-haul destinations for travelers in terms of search in September and October of this year.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll stop it at that point. The only comment is that the audience wanted to know who the respondents to the questionnaire were. Is it only TripAdvisor customers, or was it outside of TripAdvisor? If you could quickly respond to that, and then I will introduce Hugo to continue.
Yep, so the survey is being issued to TripAdvisor users who have been to the site within the past 60 days. And the results have been updated on an ongoing basis since the COVID-19 outbreak began.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Okay, thank you very much, Alex, Chad, and Alexandra.
Joanna can ask one more question on behalf of the Dr. Talib Rifai, the former Secretary General of UNWTO. He's asking the flexibility in booking or cancellation policies. Does it also relate to insurance?
Not as far as I know. I think what travelers are most concerned about is if they make a booking and for some reason they aren't able to go, are they able to easily cancel that accommodation or that attraction product and quickly get their money back to potentially rebook to another destination that they can go to?
Okay, good. Next to you, Joanne.
Thank you very much, Waziri. Great. Thank you very much, Alexandra and Chad. That was very informative and very insightful. I particularly like the fact that we can see the psychographics of the traveler, and it's very positive in terms of being interested in traveling again, which bodes well for our industry. I'll hand over to Hugo, who can then speak to us. Hugo is a partner at McKinsey & Company, and therefore we will enjoy the insights. Hugo, over to you. Hugo?
He disappeared again.
Oh, he's disappeared again. Okay, thank you very much. It's okay. We shall continue and listen to Nainan, who's been ready. And after that, we'll see whether Hugo is back on. He's been struggling like me this day. Okay, over to you, Nainan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody in Jambo. Thank you so much, Joanne. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon talking to all of you. So my colleague Hugo, when he reconnects, will talk a little bit about McKinsey's framework and approach to thinking about how to manage through this crisis. The last stage in that is really to think a little bit about reimagination and reform. So while the earlier stages of this approach really deal with how to manage through the crisis, I think there's also a significant opportunity for industry at large to be thinking about essentially what exactly will have changed. And during this period of a recovery, which is unfortunately long and ties back into a little bit of what Chad and Alexandra said, since we have the time to think about this, we've got the time to think about experimenting, measuring, and learning, and taking the long view so that we're in a position to pivot and adapt to whatever this new normal will be. So I think some of the relevant questions are really, how will demand and supply change? Who will travel, where, why, and how? And that, again, ties into some of the data that our TripAdvisor colleagues shared with us. And how will the end-to-end customer journey change, particularly in terms of the expectations of the traveler, their behaviors, and what innovations we can kind of bring to bear? And broadly speaking, how the entire travel value chain will change. Who will be stronger? Who will be weaker? And what will be different? In terms of the time frame for recovery, there are estimates out there, and of course, a lot of it is based on interaction within the industry and governmental actions around the world. But broadly speaking, the range of those estimates of recovery are between 2021 and 2022. So as I think a little bit about reimagination and reform, it really leads to a number of thoughts. And I'm going to share with you one particular version from a website of an area around diversification. So one area of topic of discussion that I have engaged with in the past has been really the opportunity for Kenya to think about broadening and diversifying its tourism beyond particularly the nature of safaris, etc. Again, tying back a little bit to the TripAdvisor data, looking at desires of future travelers to look at, say, beach vacation. Kenya's obviously got healthy offerings there. But as we think a little bit about what similar entities have done, I'm going to share with you my screen and just confirm for me that you can see this. And the website I'm pulling up, Joanne, can you see this? Is from Tourism Australia. So Tourism Australia, I think, has really for a number of years started to really create a wide offering of experiences. So as I scroll through this, they term the signature experiences of Australia. So to provide essentially a range of opportunities for travelers to choose from wildlife to cultural attractions to Aboriginal experiences, fishing adventures of Australia, golf, of course, great walks of Australia, a series of experiences around their luxury lodges, and ultimately wine. So I'm going to stop sharing that, just to give you a sense again of what similar entities have thought about in terms of creating a much wider offering so that it's not solely one set of experiences. The benefit to this is this will allow, again, as we think about the process ahead, for Kenya to think about pivoting to create a wider range of offerings that incorporate some of the things that we've heard from TripAdvisor and others about what travelers are seeking. So to think about specific ideas as it relates to Kenya, I think as we've touched on earlier and Minister Bilala spoke to, the notion of bringing domestic and of course Pan-African and regional travel, again, to the fore. Being and allowing tourists to get involved in wildlife protection, particularly now as they're all sitting at home, thinking and imagining what these future experiences are. Thinking equally at the level of Kenya about incentives and investment in under-visited parks and wildlife areas in Kenya, bringing those up to the attention of travelers. And then also thinking about strengthening and making more resilient the conservation model. And of course, that has implications on taxes and fees and permits, but this is really the opportunity and time for us to be able to rethink what all of that will imply, together with a governance model for managing areas such as the Masai Mara, which historically, and maybe we wish for those days, we had challenges around managing the total demand of tourism in those areas, but equally it's an opportunity for us to rethink what all of that means. And maybe as a final thought here, to think again, not about Kenya solely as a standalone individual destination, but as a hub for all of East Africa, to really market the region, and obviously with the air links that Kenya has into Nairobi from different parts of the world, including New York, to really have Kenya serve as a hub to really cover the entire region. Because when that demand comes back and you're able to promote that demand and drive repeat visitors, Kenya ends up being the beneficiary of that tourism coming through this hub to go explore or other neighboring areas. So thank you, Joanne. I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
Oh, thank you very much, Nain, and very, very interesting presentation. I'll open the questions up first to the panel and most directly to Damian, who's been very quiet. He probably has a question on this, and then I'll go to Waziri next.
Hi, sorry, just unmute my mic there. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think there's a slight delay on your line there. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think from working with many destinations in the development space, that experiences has become a buzzword that I think we're all familiar with. And the Signature Experience program that you refer to, which was rolled out in Canada originally, is actually a model that Kenya's already invested in. And there actually is a Signature Experience collection that's been developed for Kenya. And I know that's part of KTB's strategy to roll that out. And that experiential tourism will obviously be key in the marketing as we head towards recovery, particularly when we can filter down by experience and identify the sorts of experience that Chad talked about, people who are looking for stress-free disconnection. We can target that to those people. I'll talk a bit later about how that becomes part of a recovery strategy, but yeah, I would 100% agree that experience is critical. Waziri, over to you.
Okay, in the meantime, you can be polling. You can see the poll that has been placed there, and then Waziri is coming next. What is the nature of your organization? Anybody who's in?
Well, you want me to speak, Joanne?
Yes, yes, Waziri. Yes, Waziri.
Thank you very much, Nina, and thank you for joining us on this platform. You are selling Safari all this time. What can we do to change the Safari image? We have a good product, but what do we do to make it better? As Chad said, definitely people are going for a refreshed way of products and experiences. So what should we do different than what we used to do before? And definitely we have lost or we are losing our shine on our jewel in Masai Mara. What do we do to improve Masai Mara? Yeah. And what do we do to improve the image of the destination? Thank you, Nina.
Thank you very much for those questions, and you know, I'll be happy to provide some quick thoughts around that. So I think particularly in terms of the demand management, in fact, a silver lining with the COVID crisis might be that we're going to have to reduce density. And if we have to reduce density, I think it really leads us to have to think much more innovatively about models around, you know, how long we have visitors in place, how many we allow in a particular space. And that may in turn, especially with your focus earlier on price, may lead us to rethink how we take what's really a critical resource and make it far more available. So practicing some form of demand management, which may include off seasons, which may include, I think, some of the underserved areas we spoke about, which may include some pricing incentives, particularly to shift this demand, both in terms of time and in terms of region, to other parts of the country. So that people aren't focused on really one element, your jewel, as you mentioned it, as being symbolic and prototypical of the safari experience. I also then think we have to change the nature of that experience. So if we think about, you know, one way to think about tourism is across three different dimensions: geography, the consumer segment, if somebody who's retired or a young family with children or a single person, and then really activities and lifestyle. So art, culture, food. In fact, unfortunately, food has become something that spans across all categories: wildlife, nature, so on and so forth, fishing. But I think we can start enhance those experiences, not solely to be just about the safari experience, but to enrich them in some way and to stretch them out. So to create an experience that's unique. If we think about experiences, one thought that's always been communicated and conveyed to me is our job is to help travelers tell stories. And we have to help them tell unique stories. So if all we're doing is creating the same experience everywhere, it's really not a story that we can expect travelers will tell through social media, etc. So part of what we need to do is enhance the experience enough to create a unique story for each of them to take back to their community. So that really means enriching them with some of these other activities and lifestyles. So as I think about, beyond food, beyond luxury, but really enhancing and adapting some of these other aspects.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. And I think this is one of the things that's coming out very clearly from all the presentation and any webinar I've attended, that in tourism, the product has to speak to the individual, and then the individual is the one who's going to market the destination thereafter, especially because we all become the medium for tourism, because in our social media posts, etc., we are promoting different destinations. Now, I know the audience has participated in one poll. The results will be given at the end of all the presentations, the end of the webinar. So, and there'll be another question coming later. I want to hand over now to Karim Wisanji. Karim is a Kenyan investor, and he's also one of the people who has been very, very strong in tourism in this market. He's going to make a presentation and speak really for the Kenyan stakeholder, the tourism player, and what they've been going through. As CEO of Elewana Group, it's a Kenyan organization with interests across the globe, and they actually have got over 535 hotels worldwide. Karim, the floor is yours. Karim, please unmute your mic.
Trying. Thank you, John.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Could I ask Harry to put up the slides that we had set out, please?
Harry, are you on with the slides? I know Harry is having a problem with the connectivity. Let me just check with him. In the meantime, I think you could be talking in terms of the human challenge that the hotel industry is going through.
All right. Thank you, Joanne. I think that in the next 4 or 5 minutes, what I'd like to be able to do is give you some very local context and from ground zero, and what we have been seeing and actually feeling. It was only a few months ago when what was visible to us was a strong 2020 for the tourism industry, and in the past weeks we have been completely blindsided, little warning, and presented with this very clear and present danger, and one which is of seismic proportions. The crisis obviously necessitated near wartime measures from governments the world over, and including our own. And although it's a human crisis first and foremost, it has had some very obvious and visible consequences to our broader economy and to our tourism industry, whose survival now is being challenged along with the multitude of stakeholders within it. The numbers of the metrics are quite telling, and some of them are quite terrifying. I'm sorry that the slide isn't there for you, but I could tell you that it's important to appreciate that tourism and travel in Kenya makes up directly and indirectly some 20% of GDP. We had 2 million visitors or thereabouts last year, and we have come to a virtual standstill. As Waziri had said earlier, we have 1.5, 1.6 million people working in this industry, and their jobs are very much, they hang in the balance, and they do so for an indefinite period. More stark is that for every job in this sector, that person has 10 dependents, which puts 15 million livelihoods at risk. And I think that's a really terrifying number. And with the continued uncertainty, and what we feel here is that one human crisis could well lead to another. If our hope, however, is to change the fortunes of our industry and that of its stakeholders, and if we expect to reach our full potential, then we must openly acknowledge the elephant in the room and acknowledge that we have some systemic structural failures, both from the public and private sector. Government could certainly better recognize the inherent value of our industry, its role as a substantive GDP driver, as a significant employer, recognize it not simply by the multitude of taxes it levies on the sector, but rather acknowledge it as a fundamental pillar of the economy. It must act that we are not, year upon year, left to our own devices to deal with the vagaries that we as an industry face, both from internal and external forces. And it should not impose on us, like it is proposing to do now, onerous labor legislation that is counterintuitive and in fact detrimental to the staff who are the backbone of this industry. Nor should it try and placate us with reducing VAT when our incomes are zero. One size does not fit all, and relevant fiscal legislative support is needed for both pre and post recovery. And on the private sector front, the private sector must must change its thinking and approach drastically and very quickly. We illogically, as a private sector, remain adamant on choosing to be fragmented, that each subsector of the industry acts independentry and in self-interest. We stubbornly refuse to perceive the value of a holistic, aligned, industry-wide approach. We fail on legislative compliance and we fuel corruption, while at the same time we condemn it. We also accept that we have done little to drive innovation and have in many instances fallen behind competing destinations. And we have done little to drive diversity, and yet we complain about the lack of it. This is not because we don't have the wherewithal, but perhaps because we expect it's somebody else's problem to solve. And as from the private sector, I'm the first to admit that I am complicit to this. As Waziri talked about, the move forward, the leap forward, now more than ever, I think the private sector and government needs to think and act differently. Mm-hmm. Our country has extraordinary natural assets, heritage, and culture. We have people with a strong work ethic. We have hospitality is inherent in our culture. It's inherent in our DNA. We have the regional aviation hub, and the country continues to develop and build on its infrastructure. We have all the ingredients. If we in the here and now collectively, cohesively think differently, act differently, take bold, and perhaps even some radical steps or two, we have the opportunity post-pandemic to be a continental and perhaps even a global frontrunner in long-haul leisure and corporate travel. We're not sure of ideas on how to achieve that, but it does require a change in dynamics. Private sector needs to take the lead on driving change. Government needs to reciprocate through policy and fiscal and legislative support. And together, private sector and government can execute. The questions we have asked ourselves about this crisis are not materially different to the questions we have asked ourselves about historic crisis. What are the implications? When can we expect recovery? What will be the new normal, etc. However, how we respond to these questions this time around needs to be very different. It's time for us as a sector to be bold, to get back to the leading edge. It's time to transform and reimagine our industry, and we can do that. Let's create. Let's be bold. Let's create the first carbon negative national park, or better yet, let's make Kenya the first carbon neutral travel destination in the world, and let's put in place a resilience bond for our staff who in this crisis are most vulnerable. And let's streamline the multitude of archaic, inefficient tourism bodies that operate and create one instead that truly drives dynamism. Finally, and in my view, this crisis, with all its knowns and yet unknowns, offers us a singular, probably the singular most important opportunity to leap forward. If we have the opportunity to work together and in the manner that is cohesive, then we can realize our full potential. Thanks, Joanne. I hope I just gave you a little bit of local context.
Thank you very much. It's good to listen to a local player. And I have a question for you specifically, because picking up from the questions that the audience is asking, there are very many small players. I mean, you're a big boy. From the small players, they're saying, I don't have enough money to keep my staff employed for the next 2 months, leave alone to talk about a fund that I will create into the future. What do I do in the next 3 months? How do I keep my business alive? And as you said, they're also saying that in the questions and answers and in the comments, the chat group, asking what exactly is the intervention that will come through? Because as you rightly said, if you reduce my VAT and I have zero income, the effect is zero. So what exactly is going to be the best way for government to intervene, speaking on behalf of the stakeholders, not yourself? Number 2 question is on the impact of this whole challenge that we are facing on conservation and wildlife. Any comments that you have, Karim?
Absolutely. I think the one that resonates with me the most is what do we do with our staff? As I said, they are without question the backbone of our industry. They are on the cold face and they do the hard work. There is legislation that's being proposed right now that I suggested was counterintuitive. And the reason I suggest it's counterintuitive is because it proposes that I cannot terminate staff and give them terminal benefits, yet I can send them on indefinite unpaid leave. Mm-hmm. Now, this to me doesn't seem a sensible, reasonable proposition. I have circa 2,500 staff. Giving them terminal dues is a huge financial burden, but I know that giving them unpaid leave is cause for a much bigger human crisis, and has the potential. We will have inevitable food security problems if this is how the industry acts, and food security will lead to potential civil unrest. So I think that we've got to look at this legislation very carefully. It seems very counterintuitive to me. In terms of the taxation and the fiscal side, Joanne, I appreciate, and I think we all as a private sector appreciate, that we have a real and genuine human crisis, and resources must go towards that human crisis in the first instance. However, this doesn't absolve government from providing support, and whether that support comes in the midterm or in the longer term. As an example, from a private sector perspective, talking to colleagues, we said we have zero revenues today. We still have to carry significant holding costs, and we're uncertain as to how long we're going to have these holding costs. So perhaps one of the things to consider is looking at when the industry restarts, looking at zero-rated VAT, looking at ensuring that we don't pay corporate tax until such time we have recovered the losses that we're carrying now. And some mid and longer term stimulus. We understand the near term is very human related, and we're all cognizant of that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll ask Waziri to make a comment because I think this is one that is very close to his heart also.
Probably I want to agree with Karim. Government always looks at tourism as an industry that taxes them. I am on your side of that, but I want to be also on the side of the government. This is a business, it's private sector driven. Why don't we tax them? Yeah, but again, overtaxing, and I have this issue that if you don't feed the cow, you can't milk it. So we need to feed the cow first until it's fattened, then we can milk this cow. So yes, I agree, sometimes we need to look at it. But let me tell you, I have delivered all these issues from how do we deal with labor issues and labor laws to appreciate the current circumstances. We have held a meeting with the Minister of Labor and the Kenya Tourism Federation officials. So there is something being worked up on that. The second thing is that how do we support cash flow for now? That is very, very difficult, but how do we come with some proposals? But in the next 1 or 2 weeks, you'll see some action from government at the same time. But I want to agree with you also, and I like what you have reflected. I think also the tourism industry has not done good to themselves. Diversification is another thing. Everybody is copying the other. Yeah, that's why everybody is fighting for space in Masai Mara. Who overdeveloped Masai Mara is not government. Government only facilitated the overdevelopment, but it's the tourism industry that actually has overcrowded Masai Mara. And we need to put a stop towards that. That's why I've written my proposal to the national government, and now working with the county government. We must stop development in Masai Mara, and we must clean Masai Mara, because this is the jewel we have. Instead of us selling Masai Mara for only 3 months because of the migration, we should have an average occupancy for the entire year, which is 12 months. That is key for us. But diversification, technology, again, promotion and marketing is very crucial. I want to ask him, how come the tourism industry has not created its savings? Why? It's a month, it's very painful month, and I appreciate everything. But again, I can see there is no savings. And it's unfortunate. And I have friends who have big investment in the tourism industry. When they make the money during the time of the boom days, the money is diversified or invested in either farming and not the core business of tourism. So we need to find a way to educate our industry that whenever you make a boom or you get a boom, you need to save that money for the future if anything goes wrong. Thank you, Karim.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bonasies. I think there's a question that has not been addressed on the conservation impact of this on conservation and wildlife. We'll pack it for now until a little later when we're going into the other question and answers. But for now, I'll hand over to Hugo. I can see his presentation is already on. So over to you, Hugo.
Good. So first of all, thank you so much, and I'm really sorry about these technical glitches. It's the first time it happens to me. So let me tell you a little bit about how we see tourism and the economy in a more broader way, right? I think let me start by explaining how we are reflecting on the COVID crisis. First of all, this is a humanitarian crisis, right? And there is a part of this which has to do with public health and public health response and the evolution of the pandemic, right? There is a second part to this crisis, which is indeed the economic crisis that this will induce in our world, right? We have in recent weeks been trying to establish what could be the scenarios, and of course the scenarios need to balance two elements. On the one hand, how the virus will spread and how the health response will occur, right? And on the other hand, what will governments do to respond to the pending economic crisis? We have then defined these 9 scenarios, right? That you see over there. I think and more than the scenarios that we don't really see, I think there are two scenarios that emerge. One, which is called the A1 and the A3, right? A1 being indeed the very dominant scenario when you ask people around the world and you ask executives around the world what they believe. A1 is indeed the scenario, okay? And A1 is basically a relatively effective response to the fight to the pandemic, but with regional resurgence, right? So it means that we are going to witness in individual regions second and third outbreaks of the disease, right? At the same time, we do believe, and most people believe, that governments have acted fast, that they've been partially effective. I don't think we can say very highly effective because of very specific issues in different parts of the world. And so this is kind of becoming our central scenario, okay? We do have a more positive scenario, which says that for several reasons, because, there is more immunity than what we see because the vaccine will come faster, that we will control the virus very fast, okay, which is the A3 scenario. And so what you see there is kind of this debate about the V, the U, the L with the upward trend. This is indeed the scenarios we see. Just for you to get a sense, A1 entails a 13% reduction in the world GDP, and A3 entails an 8% reduction in world GDP. And more than that, I think the recovery pace is very different. Now, if you now reflect about the sector, the aviation, right? And I'll go a little more into the tourism afterwards, but I think aviation is very important for Kenyan tourism, right? Most of the tourism in Kenya is international tourism, and so what will happen to aviation will be key in order to ensure that the sector recovers fast. When you look at the two scenarios that we have been talking, the A3, which is the more positive, and the A1, which is the more conservative, right? We are seeing a reduction in demand anywhere between 50 to 65% for 2020. But more than this, what I think is very relevant is the speed of recovery, okay? So if we believe that the virus would be contained very fast, we could indeed see a bounce back to the same levels of 2019 already in 2021, okay? And that would be extremely positive for the aviation, first of all, but also for tourism and elsewhere. At the same time, if you believe on this scenario, which seems to be the scenario that most executives believe, we will be trailing until 2023 to meet 2019 demand levels. And so more than the impact in this year, which is of course very deep, between -50 and -65, the impact is indeed always deep. I think the big question that we see is how fast recovery will occur. And that for us is a very important reflection as we reflect on tourism in Kenya, because without aviation, in scenarios where there are additional outbreaks of the disease, even at regional level, it will be very, very complex to get tourism back to the same level as in past year. Now, let me tell you two things about China, because I think we keep looking now at China as kind of what is happening 2 months further ahead. And we have been monitoring this on a weekly basis. We are seeing a recovery. We are seeing a recovery in aviation. We are seeing a recovery in the hotel occupancy. We are seeing, that tourist attractions are working, almost at not at full level, but 30% below what was the typical level for them. And we see also more city transportation. So we are witnessing a recovery, but we are also acknowledging a plateau. So I think, what we see in China is a very fast recovery, but at the same time, they are basically stabilizing this process. And it's true that for tourism, 3 emerging insights come. First of all, they are focusing on short trips. Younger people are the mainstreams, okay? And that's very clear. Second, the interest is people are very interested to go out, but prices have to be stimulated. And that has been very, very clearly seen. Third one, and the good thing for Kenya, outdoor destinations are more favored, right? So I think if we look about museums versus parks, very clearly this is going to be the emerging trend. And so I think, we are now, and if we fast forward 2 months for Kenya, right, what we can be indeed seeing is a recovery, right, but the recovery that is very centered around these type of sites. Now, and to close, 2 more reflections on tourism. First of all, there is this debate about the new normal, right, and what does this new normal mean for tourism and in the world and then for Kenya. I think, first of all, we believe that COVID is accelerating the secular trends in the industry, and I'll go a little bit more to those trends because I think they are important. Second one, and this is a source of concern, we do expect domestic travel to be the first one to recover. And I think that is the first big issue in the case of Kenya, because domestic travel is not enough to sustain what is the backbone of your tourism. So I think the first reflection here is how can you build a value proposition and the narrative that enables to overcome this, because otherwise this is going to be the fundamental element in the coming 2 months. And then the last one is, are we going to see broader shifts in tourism? And I think one of the important questions has to do with the dynamics of the industry and some of their players. Hotels and airlines are inherently fixed cost companies, right? They are based on utilization. When you have a drop, even if you assume that in 3 months you have 50% of all of your tourists, it's not enough to sustain the full capacity that you have today installed in Kenya, right? Moreover, it's worse to have everything open operating at 40% than having 50% open and operating at 80%, because the economics are very strong. So there is a very big debate and a very tough debate about how we deal with this. Let me just go on to the secular trends, because I think also there is one that is very important in my view. The first one is consolidation will occur. And I think, of course, what I was telling you about the economics of the private players in the sector means that there will be a huge liquidity crunch, and so there will be the need to consolidate even more. I think that's very clear. The second one has to do with the role of governments, and we do see a lot of money that is going to be deployed, right? There will be, Hong Kong already announced $100 million for the tourism sector to respond to this. Promotion will be key, okay? And having tourism authorities playing a role there is going to be very important, because everyone else is going to, all the other destinations will do it, okay? I think it will be more about smaller tours and it more, there will be this element that has been spoken about, so I'll not dwell, but very clear so. But we also see that budget will become more strong. So the budget segment will become more strong, because that is where the economics of the offering of the supply works better. And that is an implication for Kenya, because this is not, it's a difficult budget destination in that sense, okay? Final comment, it has to do with coordination. I think what we have been discussing with different ministries of tourism around the world has all to do with coordinating. It's true that the government will and the tourism authorities will have a very big role, but more than that, the coordination between the different players. How do you put capacity in aviation and hotels up at the same time, right? Is absolutely key for this to succeed, okay? And I think that is something that it's not, the industry is very good and there's been always very good in trying to get together and organize, but the level of coordination that it is entailed here was never seen before in this industry, okay? And so a little bit on this, so a very big crisis, we are not yet clear what's going to happen. The recovery is the big question mark. And we do see a lot of need for a more coordinated intervention on the tourism sector, so for it to work. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation and very interesting insights. I'll just ask very quickly, Chad, if you have a comment, because based on the data here and the data we listened to earlier from TripAdvisor's research, any correlation that you see or any comment that you would make? And as you're responding, I'm going to launch a poll for people to be filling in as you respond.
Sorry, with which specific data set?
specifically in regards to the revert using the domestic tourism and the different products that people are now interested in. For example, the great outdoors.
Yep. So I think we've seen that outdoors is going to be a key part of the industry to pick up quickly. People have cooped up in their houses for ages now, and we in our survey and in our site data, we've seen that people want to be able to get out and get someplace where they can relax. They want to get away from people. They want to get away from technology. And I think Kenya offers a perfect opportunity for that with both Safari and Beaches products.
Thank you very much. Waziri, any comments before we move on to Damian?
Yes, in fact, people are concerned. I see in the chat concerned about the domestic market. Yes, it might be recovering faster, but probably the disparity in wealth between the haves and haves not in Kenya or in Africa is very challenging. So is the domestic market going to be the solution? Probably Kenya, we are much better than most of the African countries because we have a much better middle class. But still, people are complaining in the chat, saying, what is too high? How do we bring it down? And then the disparities in terms of wealth, how do we address those issues? That is key. The second issue is the role of government. What does government do? And probably here, Hugo can advise us what exactly, precisely we should do for the industry so that we can be able to sustain. We are not USA, we are not Canada, we are not UK, we are not Europe to be able to give these stimulus packages to individuals. That can be very challenging for us. You are aware about our economy and our debt ratio. So we have those challenges. What else can we do to support the industry? These are the questions we want to hear.
Okay, we're waiting to hear from you, Hugo. Any comment?
To be able to comment, I would need to listen to the question. I had a problem. I cannot listen to Cabinet Secretary, but I can listen to you, Joanne. So if you ask me the question, I'll answer. Sorry for this.
Let me try to rephrase it. I'm not sure I'll be able to say it properly, but he's saying that the Kenya government is very keen to put the right interventions in place, but he would like to know, knowing who we are not Canada, we are not the USA, we are Kenya. What are the interventions that would be the best place for us to put in place right away? I hope I have paraphrased it correctly.
Yes.
Very good. So, and sorry for this. I think there are two elements here. I think the first one is how can you create a stamp of quality on what we do, right? I think there are a couple of points that are very important, and they don't have to be with very huge investments. It has to be purposefully invested. And I think many of the things that Chad discussed for me are very important. You need to be very tailored to what you're going to do because you cannot be broad-based. Okay, I think. A couple of points. First of all, a stamp of quality, a stamp of COVID-free type of thing. That is something that you can do. Second one, ensure the flexibility element. You could indeed try to work to create kind of a destination insurance for the destination. Meaning, if something happens, you cannot come. There will be something we'll pay. This is something that you can work with insurance sector to make this work. Third, I think there is this big thing about working with the private players, and I think the only way, and this is very tricky, right? Because what we are doing is that what we are saying is that some of them could open, others would not open, right? I think for you to intervene here, I think you would need to work very closely with the local associations in Kenya, right? That is the only way, right? You need to create a framework where there is a broad agreement, where the private sector, which is the fundamental, because most of what is happening here is the private sector. So you need to orchestrate this with the private sector, but you need to work through the industry associations. Final point, which is very important, has to do, and I know a lot about Kenya and Kenya aviation. I think there is also something you need to do with Kenya Airways and KAA and the integration of this, right? So there is a part of there is a response that has to be a government response to this, right? If you are able to coordinate with the local players and the associations, then it's easier, right? Because then you know exactly how you can, steer the aviation sector into responding to what is needed. But you need to do it, right? You need, there has been some, traditional challenges in this, right? The first one being that you have the two airports in Nairobi, which is, of course, a very strong limitation to the safari. But I think orchestrating with the private sector to define exactly what are the scenarios and how you bring forward and how you reopen the tourism sector, and then steering the aviation sector to be able to respond to this are going to be very important. So three things, creating these, marketing and destination management type of strategies, in a very effective way. Secondly, working with the private associations to define how capacity goes back up, right? And then, steer the aviation sector to be able to respond to these scenarios. That would be my 3 points, right?
Thank you very, very much. I'd like to ask the audience to continue voting. I'll soon be closing the polls in the next 5 minutes. But in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Damian Cook, who will make his presentation, which I'm looking forward to. It was the one we put last because we knew it was the one that could keep somebody riveted in case we went over time. So Damian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for that putting that pressure upon me. But I'll try and keep you engaged right through to the end. Can everybody see my slides? Are the slides visible, Joanne?
Yes, they are.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everybody, and pleasure to be talking to the industry once again. I'm going to be try and bring everything you've heard during the webinar together and talk about how we interpret all of this at a strategic level for destinations. I'm sure most of you know me. I've worked in the industry here for some time with KTB and with the private sector. I've been doing a lot of consulting with destinations around the world. I consult with about almost 30. And over the past couple of weeks, obviously, have talked about nothing but the coronavirus with a colleague of mine, Greg Clusson, who was the former CEO of Canada Tourism. So I want to talk about what I'm seeing in destinations around the world in terms of their approach to creating strategies to emerge from this crisis, and just touch very quickly on each of the important phases and try and localize that as much as possible. If there's one thing we've seen is that people need to really accept the reality of this situation. It is inevitable that those of us in the industry have hoped that this would end quickly or we'd find a quick solution to this problem. What we've seen is that it's not going to, and most importantly, that it is an existential crisis to the travel industry. It actually presents an existential threat to travel as it was up until 2019. And what we're seeing is that we cannot tell you there'll be a date when this crisis ends. There's not going to be a specific date that will come when we say Corona is gone and tourism will resume as it was in 2019. It's going to come back in phases. It's going to come back gradually with eased restrictions, increased access to tourism, air access, and particular types of people traveling before they do. So the 2019 strategies we had in place last year, Kenya is now a startup organization. We're like a startup business. We're going to rebuild tourism from the ground up. That presents us some real challenges, but also, as Waziri said, some real opportunities as well to build a travel industry that works for everybody. And the reality we also need to accept is that decisions are being made outside of Kenya. Airlines deciding where they're going to send tourists to, and travelers will decide where they're going to travel based on destinations being ready to take those tourists, that show they can build carrying capacity with those airlines and with those tour operators. So really what we need to look at is 3 phases for recovery and reaction period, then moving into rethinking and re-strategizing, and then eventually moving to recovery. I want to talk a little bit about each of those phases. But the first question, as I've heard many people ask, is when will this happen? And the reality, as I said, is that there's no finite date. What we can do is look at the science and look at the progress of the virus around the world. And what we're starting to see as people start to flatten this curve is a model that looks like this, that we're in this peak period of infections now. It's starting to plateau around the world, and somewhere towards the end of the summer, it's likely to start decreasing with some potential smaller waves as well. When we look at that, we can see where we need to shift from one phase to the other, from this reaction phase into re-strategization, making use of this plateau period to develop a new strategy to move into recovery as travel becomes possible, but also that we will need to assess the indicators of those shifts and enact those marketing strategies when they become feasible and possible. So the first of those phases is this reaction period that we're in. The most important thing to understand during this period is that information is capital. It's why we have such a large audience on this webinar. People are looking for facts and they're looking for figures. And the information we put out to our trade partners, from government to trade, to our international travel trade partners, and to those potential customers, that's our capital, our credible information that we supply. So we need communication plans in place as a destination to communicate with all of those groups via the proper official channels and create online hubs to do that. The other priority at this time is to make sure that while we're not selling Kenya, because nobody can sell at this time, that we don't become invisible to the market. We need to remain engaged with those potential travelers and get them thinking about traveling to Kenya when they can. And this is something we've seen around the world. People have a captive audience of people stuck in their homes, and they're consuming more online content than ever before. So people are giving them virtual tours of art galleries, of museums. We've seen zoos in webcams. So people can have virtual travel experiences, because travel, as Chad said, is one of the things they're dreaming of doing. We're seeing destinations like Greece, who've created the specific Greece from Home campaign to now take people on virtual trips around Greece, guided trips around the country as well. And we've started to see this in Kenya as well. And I give credit to some of the players in the industry that are out there sharing virtual content. Old Pejida, who've been doing their sofa safaris every day to show people wildlife, Game Watchers, who've been sharing stuff through their Facebook pages, and Gama, a bunch of stakeholders that have started moving into this space. But one of the challenges we've seen is connectivity. As we've seen a bit on this webinar, can be a challenge when it comes to connections. And that is a challenge for many people in the industry that want to share their content and their products with the world. Good news is I'm working on a product with Kenya Tourist Board and Safaricom to get these devices out in the country, which are live streaming backpacks that will enable high quality streams of game drives and Kenyan experiences to the market. And those of you that be interested, those of you in the industry that be interested in participating in that, please drop me a line through my email contact that I'll provide at the end. Another opportunity we're seeing is conservation, which has been raised several times that Joanne has brought up as well. We're starting to see the tourist industry, while they're out of work, starting to support conservation initiatives. In Australia, dive companies are now working with marine conservationists to replant coral and support reef conservation to show that they're invested in protecting those resources and that those resources will be there when travelers come back. So the next phase we move into is the rethinking, or the re-strategization. It's important we develop a robust strategy to make sure that we reach those potential travelers when they're ready to start traveling. So we need to identify who that first phase of travelers will be. We see that it's domestic, and we need a strong domestic strategy to get Kenyans out and traveling and make that affordable and accessible. We then take that to the region. Short-haul travel is much more realistic than long-haul travel coming through hub airports to get people to the destination. We need to look at what products we have and which ones will be viable to that first phase of travelers. One thing we're unfortunately not going to see is the rapid return of high volume travel. So models like charter travel, package tours, and cruise ships that require large numbers are not going to have those numbers. It also brings in issues of social distancing and how that tourism will be managed. Some products will now be viewed through the prism of this pandemic. Buffets, for example, we've seen in some destinations buffets being a vector for infection. In one destination, 30 cases coming from a single hotel buffet. We may never see that model of feeding our clients come back again. Cruise ships, again, another challenge when it comes to volume of tourists, and even travel sharing like Airbnb when it comes to health and safety. So we need to identify what are the products and what are the markets that we can reach out to and prioritize those. And it means a bit of triage. Identifying which airlines are likely to come back first. Keep in mind that not all of the airlines are going to survive this. We're already seeing South African Airlines gone, Air Mauritius going. There's going to be bankruptcies. A lot of the research shown by an organization called Oxford Tourism Economics showed that many airlines were functioning with about 2 months of cash in the bank. Without 2 months of revenue, they're starting to disappear unless they're nationalized. So identifying those key aviation partners and those key booking channels to get those tourists here, and which of our segments are also likely to travel. One challenge I see for Kenya is that we know that in our coast product, we have a lot of older Europeans that travel. In our safari product, we have a lot of retired Americans that travel. That over 60 group is one of the most impacted demographics by this virus at a health level, at a financial level, and also they're going to be more frightened and concerned about traveling as well. So we need to look at who we're targeting and what segments will be vital for recovery. And that brings us to our third and final phase of recovery. As I said, all evidence is suggesting to us that the volume model will be slowest to recover by the very nature that it needs large volumes to drive profit. So it's going to be some time before we reach those 2019 levels. As Hugo said, and most of the data research companies I'm working with are looking at 2023 before we approach anything like the levels we saw in 2019. So we can't expect those large volumes to come back. We need to look at independent travelers. We need to look at a higher value traveler as well. So we need to be able to identify when these phases are and when we start to move forward. And we can see indicators of as we shift from react to rethink to recover, the easing of restrictions, the resumption of domestic tourism, resumption of flights within Kenya, the region, and then international, and the resumption of those key first wave of independent travelers. So we need to establish timelines for that in our tourism businesses and for our destination. When are each of those things likely to be? And that's where data and research is critical to us building a strategy that's based on hard data so we can make projections about when we'll see recovery and those indicators that will help us move us through those critical phases. And we're going to be moving into a new normal. Tourism is not going to be as it was last year for some time. And we really need to think about how travel is going to change. It's going to be a new industry. We're starting to hear, I had a conversation about this morning with Pato in Asia, the creation of bilateral tourism agreements. Because many people are asking, how do we go around this issue of quarantining people for 2 weeks on arrival? How do we identify when people are actually safe to travel? Is it passports based on immunity? And what we're likely to see emerge is bilateral tourism agreements, two countries agreeing that we have the right airport standards, the right health standards to send tourists to each other's country. Australia and New Zealand are starting to look at this relationship now. The EU is starting to discuss this to approve countries for travel. And this is something that we should start to look at. How can we start to make those a new model of flying? Disinfectant on arrival at the airport through a vapor tunnel. Disinfectant of your baggage, disinfectant of your hand luggage, receiving a test within the airport before you're enabled to fly. Now, some people say that sounds ludicrous, but I would encourage those people to think back to 9/11, because before that date, you could walk straight through an airport and onto a plane with almost no security checks. You could walk into a cockpit of a plane if that door was left open. And those things changed, and they will again when it comes to the regulation and management of flying. Also, critically, rate is not going to define occupancy. We're going to probably see an increase in cost of international travel. We need to realize that prices will be higher. And trying to race to the bottom for our international markets and undercut each other will really damage our industry. So we need to have a yield-based strategy as well and make it viable for people to travel. There's 6 steps we're going to have to address. The most important thing is understanding the current situation as it is in the context of that, then the likely scenarios for recovery and base those on dates, then define the scenarios that are going to work for Kenya, the priorities actions that we need to take to move into those spaces, and then an intervention plan for achieving that. And I would like to wrap up by saying, and I think this is really important, that while we're all facing challenges, we're also facing huge opportunities. For a very long time, we've been saying, in our tourist industry, things would be great in Kenya if only we didn't have this problem, if only we didn't sell to this market that didn't work for us or have these products that didn't work. Up until January of this year as a tourism consultant, if there's one thing I talked about more than anything over the last year with destinations, it was over-tourism. We have too many tourists and they're damaging the reputation of our destinations. I think we can say that problem has been solved. It's gone. But do we want it? But do we want it back? Do we want to return back to a tourism that had negatives with it? No, we want to rebuild a tourism product that will work for Kenya, that will work for Kenyans, and that will work for travelers coming to the country and ensure the benefits of tourism and the revenue of tourism is spread to as many communities in this country as possible. That we're targeting travel that keeps the revenue in the country, that doesn't keep revenue offshore, that supports as many Kenyans and as many Kenyan businesses as it can, and also that protects the environment, the conservation, and our wildlife and our natural environments that are critical to our tourism product. So what I would suggest is that this is a reset for Kenya tourism. We are a startup business. Let's make it a great business. Let's rethink the way we approach travel. Let's rebuild a travel industry and work together. It's great to see all these discussions happening over in the sidebar, but let's stop attacking each other. Let's find solutions that work for everybody, and let's start rebuilding a new tourism and a Kenya tourism that's great for Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, Damian. Thank you very much. Thanks for leaving the slides too for those who may want to get in touch. I think you can all understand why I asked Damian to be last first. He had the longest presentation and he wasn't going to cut it down. And number two, you obviously have found it very interesting. I think the comments that I see on the screen from the participants all say the same thing, that we've had an excellent round of panelists, a lot of learnings, and everybody would like to get the presentation so that they get into it. So thank you very much, Damian, Chad, and the rest of the panel. I want to say before we close, I would like us to go to the polls for Maggie Ireri to take us through what the results of the poll, the questions that we polled are. Maggie, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I think Damian's presentation was music to my ears. He talked about the need for data and research. And as you can see, we've done a live poll here, and I just want to take you through the results. So if you can go to your screen on your right, there's a tab written polls, and I'd like to request you to click on that. Once you click on that, I want us to scroll down to the first question. The questions have been put in a different order, but the question that I want us to go to is, what is the nature of your organization? And this is what you filled, indicating the nature of your organization. So this gives us a kind of profile of organizations or people who are actually on this call. And we can see majority of them are tour and travel operators at 35%. And then we have 25% in lodging and accommodation. And every other question that you see the results for, it will mean that this is a kind of profile of people who are actually presenting or giving their feedback. If we go up, actually, let's go up to the question that reads, comparing your business revenue for January to April 2019 versus January to April 2020, what is estimated change in business revenue? And we can see 47% are saying there's been a 76% to 100% decrease in revenue. I mean, that is really high. I was looking across the world to see what statistics exist. That kind of percentage is actually recorded in Italy, where there's a 47% reduction in revenue. And in Germany, there's been a 40% reduction. So you can see where a majority of the people who participated in this survey fall is quite high. Then we have another 28% who say between 51 and 75% decrease, really, really high. If we scroll to the bottom, which is the other question, which of the following measures reflect what has happened to staff in your organization? And here we were forcing you to pick one because we wanted to know what is the main thing that has happened. And we can see 28%, which is the highest percentage. Actually, no, 29% say salary cuts. And the salary cut is between 1 and 50%. Then you have 28% saying that staff have been sent on unpaid leave. And this reflects some of the things that have been discussed in this call. This is the effect of COVID on the industry in Kenya. Now, I want to go to the last question, which is basically talking about some of the interventions that government has put in place. And we recognize that some of these interventions have been here for a short while, but it was important to ask, which of these interventions has your organization benefited from? And you can see the percentages there. And the highest percentage is a reduction of pay-as-you-earn, 25%. 21% of you who responded are saying that. Then we have tax relief of those earning below 24,000, 17% are saying that. And then you have people talking about reduction in corporate tax and so on. However, if you go to the bottom, we actually have 21% who are saying, you know what, regardless of the measures that government of Kenya has put in place, we have not benefited. And maybe over time, we want to track whether these measures that have been put in place will be benefiting the industry. So in a nutshell, those are the results, but I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation where we can be polling more on the industry and beginning to talk more about facts and figures so that we're able to talk from a position of data and research. So that's it for me, and thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Maggie. Data does not lie, numbers do not lie, and I think it is very critical. Thank you for creating this poll with very incisive questions. This particular last question, I think, is very important to Waziri, and when he's doing his closing remarks, I'm sure he'll talk about it, because this is an area he has been a passionate advocate and pushing for it. And I think it's very important that the 33% who feel unrepresented also get fully represented. I'll now ask that we come to the close of this session. And in closing, I want to say thank you very, very much, first and foremost, to the panelists, Hugo and Ninan from McKinsey. I want to say thank you to Alexandria and Chad from speaking from 2 different countries and yet speaking to us on the same subject and giving us such insights. Karim, right here in Kenya, thank you so much for speaking so passionately on behalf of the industry. I think you represented very, very well, especially for people who are not at your level. I also want to thank Damian very much. Damian, your presentation has been requested. And I also want to thank Maggie for analyzing the polling result for us. All the presentations as well as the recording will be shared with everybody who has been part of this part of this audience, so that you can then thereafter see in depth what you can do to apply it to your particular business and to advise other people who did not attend this particular forum. I'd like to thank Waziri very, very much for organizing this session. This is not the final word I'm saying, but Waziri, if you did not organize this session, where would we have received all this information? And your team behind the scenes has done a sterling job. I'm really, really happy. As we close, I also want to say, as I hand over to you, Waziri, that some of the key highlights that have come out is that, one, we are now a startup. We are no longer what we were. And so everybody is starting at tabula rasa. You can rebuild, you can diversify, you can recreate. And I think the industry needs to take that very seriously. The need for diversity, the fact that no one size fits all, whether it is from government interventions or whether it is from the tourist player, and that the new traveler is looking for maximum value and wonderful experiences that are totally memorable. And so as I hand over to you, Waziri, I also want to say that for the questions that were sent through and the charts that are there, we are recording them and we've gone through them, and we shall be responding to all of them in different ways. Waziri, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and thank you all the panelists. Thank you. This is a great honor. It's been historic today. For the first time, we are holding this webinar and also interacting with the private sector online. We had 2 meetings or several meetings before, but that was physical before even we had one single case of coronavirus. So here we are lucky today. We are on, and thank you. I want to thank you, Joanne, for being good monitor. We had the hitches initially, but we are okay now. I want to thank the back team, CIO, and Harry, and Ali Hussein. Thank you very much for organizing this technical aspect of the webinar, and my team, led by my PSCs, Chief Administrative Secretary Cas Boynet, and also my office staff in my office as well. So, but I want to also recognize that quite a number of questions were raised, and we appreciate all those questions. There were issues on almost 6 categories. One was finance, labor and staff related, marketing and communication, airlines, and the future of the industry. So the hospitality industry talked about what do we do on reopening? What are the stimulus packages and the bailout? Tours and travel providers talked about fast-tracking payments of pending bills, and then promoting domestic tourism. Aviation, transport, and logistics talked about the health measures and resuming of travel, pushing a comprehensive tax relief, and also making Africa to be the domestic market. Curio and entertainment and auxiliary services provided talked about SMEs and startups and how do they get funding for it. And they also talked about the suspension of tourism levy and tourism licenses for 6 months at least. Media and technology and services, investment in digital space. That was another key issue. Invest in digital content. Those are the issues that were discussed. And the 6th one was the conservation sector, to support conservation during this crisis, also be resilient in transforming the wildlife product. So yes, these are the good things, but I want to assure members of the industry in Kenya here, I have presented to the National Treasury on your behalf the issue of creating a revolving or recovery fund. How do we access the big fund at a low interest rate with a 10-year repayment plan? That is one proposal I have sent to the Treasury. The second is deferring of taxation, corporate tax, VAT, and all other taxes deferred at least for 6 months, and then a repayment plan for another 12 months. How do we do this to make the industry revive? The other thing is about reduction of costs. Here, the government is actually considering how do we give a discount on park entry fees or give a discount on tourism levy, whatever those fees are. We are considering and the impact would it have on us as government. But more important thing, sometimes we reduce the park entry fees and we reduce all these taxes, but the package still remain expensive. How do we rationalize that? The other issue is how do we finance marketing? And as you're aware that we have allocated 500 million for marketing, 300 for in-market programs, and then 200 million for PR. And then also we need to appreciate that we need to give incentive to the industry so that they can do some reinvestment. So designate some of the areas and some of these projects to be special economic zones. How do we make sure that the special status? And then the key issue we have always forgotten is how do we take conservation and wildlife to be our flagship project? Because the image of Kenya is safari and wildlife. We need to protect our wildlife. We need to make sure there is more space and land for wildlife and conservation. This is paramount to our revival. And also, I want bring the final point. How do we support aviation? As you have been told by Damian, aviation will take some time to recover. So how do we make sure that we become proactive in the transport sector? How do we open sky policy in Africa? How do we make sure that Kenya Airways and others become active in the continent? So those are the key issues I have presented on your behalf to Cabinet and to the National Treasury for consideration. We are waiting further consultation and hopefully we'll be able to give you some good news. But on a final point, colleagues, and again, thank you very much on the panel, there is the new reality check, the new norm. And here we talked about we must leap. If we don't leap, we might perish. Because this is the only opportunity when we're such crisis, we can transform. That's why I talked about we must transform Masai Mara. We must transform the beach project. These are our core products and we must transform them. And that's why it's going to be sometimes painful, but we must do it. So number one, for me, restart the industry. So it's not about wanting to go back on our feet. No, we want to start from a clean slate so that we can be able to do what the market and the new traveler wants. Number two, change mindset for the domestic market and for the regional market. I know sometimes the packages are being designed for Europe or in America, but as you've been told, the age demography has changed because above 60 people will fear to travel. So the only people who can travel and take the risk are the younger generation. How do we capture through that market? Number three, legislation and re-engineering of legislation, both governance, and here I want to commend Karim, the private sector also is fragmented. How do we bring the private sector united and they can do things even on their own, but also come together and present their issues to government? But also government needs to reform. How do we reform our tax regime in tourism? How do we look at things differently? These are the things we need to do. Number four is establish the recovery fund. I've been pushing for this, particularly for SMEs. Yeah, so that the SMEs, the restaurants, the supply chain in the industry need to access affordable loans and long-term loans so they can recover. Number five is conservation. Conservation is key. Without safari and without wildlife, we might not be competitive or even have tourism in our country. Number six is digital world. We are in the digital world. Are we compatible? So that's why the government is investing with Google on the issue of 4G so that we have broadband. But the most important thing, we must be compatible, all of us. And finally, for me, this is a pet project. Without aviation, we cannot get tourism. So we must think about aviation. We need to configure the entire tourism sector that to harmonize aviation, transport, and tourism to be one. Because without consolidating all this, we cannot address these issues. But I want to thank all of you. Thank you very much for this honor. And today is historic, as we say, it's our first time as government. We are doing this with you as a trade. But I appreciate your comments. And we have a team in the back office looking at all these issues, and we'll try to resolve them as much as we can. I don't know when will be the next webinar for the industry. Probably, Joanne, you should advise us, and we can organize it again so that we can get feedback. Thank you very much. And colleagues and panelists, I highly appreciate and thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CS. Thank you, panelists. I'd like to thank the delegates also for attending. It has been an overwhelming audience. Actually, I think I've never attended a webinar with so many participants and with so little rate of drop-off. I think one of the things that's important is that when we are exiting, we shall do an exit poll that will tell us how often you'd like us to be holding these webinars. And we expect that it will be every 2 weeks, but we want to get the feedback from you as well. And also on the topics that are relevant and important to you, so that Waziri can address them on behalf of government. Once again, thank you very much. It is an opportune moment for us to recognize that as government interacting with private sector, this is the only way forward. So I will close there and wish you all a very good time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you on our next trip. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.